Hello. Welcome to my channel Touching Stories. You're about to hear an amazing story about love and unexpected decisions. Enjoy watching.
He had to stop halfway to the house because of an urgent need. Tristan's well-mannered Tristan twisted and whined in the back seat, hinting that the interior of the owner's car might be in big trouble, for which he would have to pay for dry cleaning. "No problem, kid," Archie shrugged, and carefully pulled over to the curb, slowing down. "Just don't run too far and don't chase squirrels, okay?" The dog responded with an approving shriek and scraped his paw on the door. Archie got out of the car and let Tristan out. A moment later, the golden coat of the retriever disappeared into the dense greenery. Taking a deep breath, so that his chest ached from the volume of oxygen he'd taken in, which made his head spin, Archie buttoned his jacket and turned up his collar. The rain was drizzling, promising to turn into a full-blown downpour. From the sounds of it, Tristan was hunkered down in a nearby thicket, acting like an obedient boy. Archie looked around at his surroundings. Fields, forests, beauty. But on this particular section of the highway, there was something out of the ordinary scenery of the highway, and there was a flock of traders on the side of the road. Of course, it was not a spontaneous market, but sometimes, and in good weather, probably daily, someone was selling something here. Archie had caught a glimpse of them on his way here, but by the time he returned in the evening, the mushroom vendor in a huge yellow raincoat had gone. The tall old woman in a black dress with a bunch of wilted, even from a distance, flowers. The only person left was the grandmother. Archie shivered. Clearly, she was not here to sell her simple goods. In the distance and up in the air, there was a rumbling sound. It seemed that the clouds during the time that he had been waiting for the dog, which, by the way, for some reason had quieted down, had grown even darker and darker, and had become even lower and more threatening. Sighing, Archie took a decisive step towards the old woman. "Good afternoon," he smiled affably. This late character of the people's trade looked very remarkable. The old woman was small in stature, barely reaching the man's shoulder. She was dressed in an old-fashioned cotton dress, on top of which a jacket made of leatherette was thrown over her shoulders, which had shrunk to such an extent that it already looked shaggy. The old woman wore some inarticulate rubber flip-flops on her feet, under which her feet were insulated by several pairs of socks. The black handkerchief was tied very low, pulled down over her forehead, which, coupled with the fact that the old woman bowed her shaking head, made it impossible to look into her face, to meet her gaze, but Archie didn't need it. "How much are you selling for?" He nodded at the only item downstairs. A wicker bag of strawberries. The berries looked large, scarlet, except that they had been there since morning, and the rain had poured into the bowl, so the strawberries didn't look appetizing. But Archie didn't like strawberries much at all. When he was a kid, he avoided them because he was allergic to them. That is, as it turned out later, there was no allergy to strawberries, but his mother and aunt, who grew them for sale, taking up almost the whole vegetable garden, liked to say so that the boy did not eat, as he overheard their conversation later, the most tasty berries, when they sent him to work on the beds. So by the will of this fate, Archie tried garden strawberries only at the age of 13, and it didn't impress him. He liked apples and blueberries much better. These memories flashed through his mind as he approached the old woman. The man shook his head, rubbed his chin. "What are you selling berries for, Grandma?" "As much as you want," murmured the old woman, and a hand rushed toward Archie sharply, so that he almost bounced. It seemed for a moment that the long, hooked, dry-looking fingers, like the branches of a dead bush, would grab him, catch him. But the old woman only stretched out her hand, palm up. "What you give, that's all right." "Oh, Archie mumbled, and began fumbling in his pockets. Luckily, he had cash on him, and by the way, he hadn't always trusted electronic systems in the way money was stored in banks and on plastic cards. He had a little thing about it. "Here," he said, putting 500 in the palm of his hand. A fat price for such a strawberry. But first of all, there was no smaller bill, only another 10 paper ones. And that, of course, was not enough. And secondly, Archie suddenly felt sorry for the old woman. She was frozen here, in the middle of the highway, where it was almost an hour's walk to the nearest dwelling, if the map remembered correctly. And how long had she been bending her back while she was picking berries? Apparently, the old woman lived very lonely, and if she was here, Her relatives would never let her go, would never allow such a thing. Not that Archie'd expected it, but he had already happened to help pensioners a couple of times. And usually they were eager to talk back. But this old woman only closed her fingers, hiding the money in her fist, and hunched down more than before. "Grandma," the man coughed awkwardly, "can I give you a ride home?" She said nothing. The bushes rustled close by and Tristan appeared. The dog's muzzle clearly showed the pleasure of a long walk, and a scattering of turnips adorned his golden six. And on the paws with the belly was simply terrible to look at. They acquired a thick brown tone of dirt, probably even a touch of clay. Archie sighed. They were in for a long wash and scrub. "I'm sorry, but I just thought the weather was bad." Archie turned to the old woman. He was going to tell her that he wasn't a maniac. He just wanted to help her. He would take her wherever she needed to go, or he could even use his phone to call her family to pick her up. He turned back to his dog for a moment, and when he returned his attention to the old woman, there was no one at the place where she had just stood. Archie naturally opened his mouth. The old woman had vanished, and the only thing that told him she wasn't imaginary was the swaying bushes ahead, as if she'd gone through them. "Grandma," he was about to follow, but stopped. What if she was just scared of him? Strangers on deserted highways are different after all. Rationality overcame the desire to help. The old woman probably lives in the nearest village. Maybe she is hardened and used to go running in such weather. Maybe if he becomes her, naturally so to speak, pursuing her, she will have a heart attack and she will die. "We should go home," he told Tristan, and picked up the basket and walked to the car. He didn't notice that in the thick grass in front of the bushes where the grandmother had disappeared, there was a bill lying on the ground, the money he had given her. They passed the rest of the highway without any adventures. Tristan pretended to be the most obedient boy in the world and dozed, stretched out in the back seat. The plate beneath him was, of course, kicked to the side. Archie made a mental note to try to clean the car himself tomorrow. Finally, the car pulled into town. The familiar streets of the dormitory district glimmered on the sides of the rain curtain, and then a typical panel. 9-story building appeared. Archie sighed. He was tired as hell, but at least he'd been lucky enough to park in the driveway. Letting Tristan out of the car, the man entered the driveway. There was a notice by the elevator saying that it was still out of service. "What am I paying money for?" he muttered under his breath, and set off up the steps to his 9th floor. On the 6th floor, he remembered that the strawberries were left at the bottom, cursed, and came down. "I didn't need that berry at all." But it didn't seem good to write off someone else's labor as garbage. His grandmother was picking, trying. "Stay here," Archie said sternly to the dog when they entered the apartment. "Now we'll wash you." It took an hour and a half instead of the planned 30 minutes. Tristan was clearly dazed from the fresh country air and calmed down only when he completely exhausted his master and brought him to the threat to put someone on a leash and walk only and exclusively so. So what to do with it? Archie picked a berry squeamishly and skeptically assessed the contents of the box. The strawberry spirit was sweet and flattering in the kitchen, but unfortunately the fruit was already gone. After Archie had gone through it, however, he had a cup of edible berries. He washed one and tasted it sweet. Not like plastic store-bought strawberries. "Shouldn't we make a pie, buddy?" He turned to the dog, who had already laid down on his favorite place, a worn mat by the radiator. Even though the radiator was not warm in the summer, Tristan preferred it to all the other places in the apartment. In general, Archie's diet lately consisted of convenience foods and fast food. There was neither strength nor desire to work in the kitchen, and although it seemed that the results of the morning's trip should have discouraged the rest of the desire and strength, on the contrary, it seemed that such cozy domestic chores were just what was needed. The man began to put out of the kitchen cupboards all the necessary large bowl, eggs, whisk, flour, leavening agent. He took the basket that was still standing on the corner of the table. Didn't need the basket, of course, so into the trash. It would have been in the bucket in a moment, but Archie squinted, because at the bottom, among the brownish-bearing mush, something glittered. He swept it along the bottom, cleaning it, picked it up, and in his fingers he clutched an elongated golden bead. "Wow," Archie said, and continued his search. Another bead, and another. They were kind of stuck down there in the weave of the bough. In the end, there were half a dozen. He threw them into a sieve and dipped them under the tap water. But that was unnecessary, and it was clear enough that it was gold. Archie ran his hand nervously through his hair. "You're running away." "No way." "What gold?" But the beads looked ancient. Each was adorned with the finest, most skillful ornamentation. Costume jewelry? Of course, it would take an expert to determine the exact composition. Forgetting about the pie, the man sat down at the table, placed the strainer with his find in front of him, and bit his lip nervously. How did it get into the bowl of berries that the old woman was selling? I don't think she'd put it there. Aha! A bonus for the lucky customer. No. Archie closed his eyes, and for some reason he imagined it very vividly. How the old woman, bowing low to the forest floor, picks berries, scooping up strawberries with her palm, not bothering to tear one by one neatly. Her fingers were barely bendable. And at the same time she picks up beads from the grassy bed. Stop. Where would gold beads come from in the forest? That's nonsense, said Archie. Oof. Tristan put his muzzle in his master's lap and looked into his eyes. A hint that it was time for a snack. The dog was accustomed to a mixture of wet and dry food. Archie opened the can and poured the contents into his ceramic green bowl with a funny drawing of a pirate flag. It tickled his daughter's heart to choose while they were still together. His stomach rumbled and whimpered, and Archie remembered that he had eaten breakfast long ago, and then it was not to that. The road to this village. Unsuccessful negotiations when he was almost thrown out the gate. Returning home. Now these berries with beads. Putting the kettle on, the man looked into the bathroom. He opened the faucet and splashed a few handfuls of cold water in his face. It was invigorating. He reached for a towel and threw a glance at himself in the mirror. From the mirror, he was looking at a man of 39 years old on the passport and looking, as his former spouse today pejoratively noted, much younger. So a boy, it is impossible to take seriously. However, he knew it was so. An additional argument invented when the others ran out, although it was worth admitting. Right now, he reminded himself of that guy who had studied at the university, the same dark circles under his eyes, the same stubbled cheeks, the cheekbones protruding. His clothes are not that loose, but I should have left the gym for nothing. The subscription, given by Stan, was still valid, by the way. Shaking his blonde hair, which should be cut to the middle of the industry's neck, Archie came out of the bathroom. The kettle had boiled long ago, and now he could cut sandwiches and then think about everything else. He changed his mind about baking the cake. His family had ceased to exist a year ago. A year ago, and on the same day. Archie had no doubt that Maria had chosen today to remind him of what he had lost. But to his triumph, she had not succeeded. To be more precise, she had not hurt him with that hint. But she succeeded in another way. The divorce proceedings, which had been finalized for what seemed like an eternity, preserved Archie's custody of his daughter with her mother. But that was a technicality. In reality, it was Mary who ruled over 15-year-old Aurora, and it was doubly disgusting because Archie knew the ex-spouse knew little of what she had gotten. She wanted to take everything from him. And since he was never rich in material possessions, she has her sights set on his daughter. She'll be better off with me, Archie said firmly and with justifiable self-assurance this morning. He realized that the longer Aurora was in this house, the more she distanced herself from him. What are you talking about? Maria grinned, then grimaced, the contempt and anger always vividly reflected on her face. The conversation took place in the country house of the new husband of the former other half. His name was Austin. He owned several machine shops, and in Maria's opinion, he was an oligarch, a real man, a perfect father for Aurora, whom he, Archie, had dissolved completely, just to the point of indecency. Archie's opinion was the opposite. He saw Austin as a former gangster who was now trying his best to survive in honest business, but was only getting deeper and deeper in credit. Yes, he had a mansion, a house in a luxury village. True, it would not exceed the average two-bedroom apartment by the meter. But how much pathos? It's sickening. Archie honestly tried to understand on what basis these two had met. Well, it was obvious that Maria wanted money, and he. Probably, there were no other ditches to get in touch with such a type. No, I had to admit Maria had been beautiful once. Only, as it turned out too late, under the model. Appearance disguised a very complex character. Archie once found a comparison, and it was to his liking there are in the world poisonous fruit that seemed appetizing. And so it was with Maria. He really wondered when she'd show her true self with Austin, or is he a different matter? Or does she not allow herself to behave like that with him? Because he's got money. Archie recognized he was physically inferior to this former Ultimate Fighting champion, who was a head taller than him and twice as broad in the shoulders. Aurora had lived in the new house since the first day they'd been divorced, and it had never happened before that Marita had allowed her daughter to stay overnight for a couple of days in her father's apartment. "You are a bad influence on her," said the former wife and pressed her lips. "That's it. This conversation is over." Archie was paying alimony, and not only how much is due by law, but also added from himself. He couldn't let his child have a bad life. He would do anything for that. And the first item in this plan was to take his daughter. But this mission seemed more and more impossible. Maria had already said more than once that he could only see Aurora temporarily, and that later he would not dare to go near her at all, because Austin had promised to help organize the whole thing. Archie once tried to say that actually there are no such rights, you can't do that, because he's the girl's own father. He's not a monster. He doesn't drink. He has his own place, a decent job. Well, let temporarily unemployed practically. But this in essence does not change anything. He is her birth father, and there are no laws in the world to deprive him of the right to see her, to take care of her. But as time passed since that fateful day when her ex had taken Aurora away, Archie was having more and more bad doubts. What if she had decided to act cunningly? If she decided to use all her venom not to deprive him of his child legally, which of course should not happen, but to simply re-educate Aurora. She's only 15 years old. What if she managed to process her brain in such a way that Aurora would consider her father a loser, the one who ruined her mother's youth? Archie knew Austin was lavishing his daughter with expensive gifts. The latest smartphones, shoes from boutiques, pays for her riding lessons, promised to give her a car for her 16th birthday. And what could he, Archie, offer? Archie's parents divorced when he was 8 years old, and it so happened that he practically roamed between his mother's and father's new families until he came of age. And though the atmosphere in them could not be called quite unhealthy, but growing up, Archie realized more and more that he was a stranger there and there, because his father and his new girlfriend had a son and 2 daughters. Mother, on the other hand, married a widower and became a good stepmother to his daughter. In addition, once being already divorced, Archie's father angrily threw his mother a phrase that perhaps Archie and not his own. "Fatten, they say." Then he apologized, saying he'd had a few drinks and had said something stupid out of some old grudge, just because he wanted to hurt her. But Archie remembered it. He remembered it too well. He had never approached his mother with a question about his origins. But it was as if his subconscious mind was lodged in his parents' divorce because he had caused it. Maybe his father had always suspected that he was raising someone else's son, and that was why love had collapsed. Archie left his hometown as soon as he turned 18. Just told his parents that he'd had enough. He couldn't take it anymore, and they didn't even seem to understand why. After all, fed, clothed and shoe, as they say. Well, there were no heart-to-heart talks. There was no family closeness of either party. But after all raised, in short, they resented him, that he left, and Archie moved to another city where he had a family man, also, by the way, estranged from his family. It was his paternal grandfather. Sam was known as the subhuman monster for leaving his seriously ill grandmother behind, and left on an expedition to Africa. And although grandfather then said that actually, the grandmother herself asked him to go for the fulfillment of dreams, a chance for which once in a lifetime happens, he was not really believed. They just put him down as a heartless traitor because his grandmother passed away while he was away. Grandpa Sam gave his whole life to this love of history and went to Africa to study some ancient civilizations. He taught at the university, and Archie went there too. His parents did not approve of this choice, by the way. They predicted a lonely life of a bookworm, but his grandfather's passion was contagious, and Archie enrolled and studied to be a historian. Grandpa passed away just a few days after his grandson received his diploma. The old man held Archie's hand then in the hospital and joked that he had passed on his legacy, which meant he had finally closed all his debts in life. Archie got a job at the same university, and it seemed that life was good. Even his parents, having received news about it, praised him. And then he met Maria. They met banally in a cafe, where he went for a snack at lunch, and she worked there as a waitress. Archie flirted ineptly, shy even, stupidly joked that something about the pancakes on the menu. He did not think he had a chance. In general, relationships with the opposite sex were not his strong suit. And when Maria agreed and they went on a real date, he felt like the happiest man in the world. She told him about herself. It turned out that she came to the city from the village, wanted to enter the manager, but failed the exams. And now she was living off the rest of the money that her parents had given her. And then apparently, she would have to go back. Archie felt like a noble knight and laughed at a bold proposal. First, to start dating seriously, and secondly, to move in with him. Because the 4-room apartment with high ceilings and beautiful Stalin-era moldings belonged to him. His grandfather had left it as an inheritance. Maria blushed, but quickly agreed. Archie was just happy and did not want to listen to some colleagues who said that this dubious story, who convinced him that the girl from the village just found a fat fish and spread a net. Archie wouldn't let anyone insult Maria and nearly had a row with everyone. Just 3 months after they met, they were married, and it was a lavish wedding. The dress for the bride bought Italian, in a fashionable boutique. It was not affordable, in theory, but recently Archie was lucky one of his books on history was highly appreciated by readers and published in large numbers, and a separate edition was in English, that is, for foreign sale. The income from this book and allowed to pay for a wedding for the princess, and the only one. Soon a daughter, Aurora, was born. Maria quickly abandoned the idea of trying to re-enter the university. She told her husband that she sees herself as a housewife, and he was not against it. It seemed to him so even better. So we'll be clean and cozy in the house, we'll be on the table always homemade delicious food, cooked by the hands of a caring wife. He loved her, and not 1 year this love closed his eyes to all the shortcomings of Maria. The fact that she did not like to clean the house, grumbled that the old man's things, that is, the library and the collection of antiquities that belonged to Grandpa Sam, should be thrown out altogether, on the fact that she did not cook good, that she was often in a bad mood, and all the reasons she had for it, and that Archie couldn't buy a floor-length mink coat, and the fact that her daughter was capricious, although in the presence of Archie, Aurora was always quiet. And then, a year and a half ago, Archie lost his job. And it was so stupid. The thing was, Archie didn't think he was handsome. Handsome. Maybe. But he certainly didn't understand the remarks that the rector's wife, Sarah, sometimes made. This statuesque, glamorous lady often dropped in to visit her husband, not shy of disrupting his work process. And the reason for this was burning jealousy. Sarah, having a keen eye, once said that all the female students were jealous of Archie, as well as the serving girls in the canteen. And the teaching staff was not without such a sin. It's a good thing you're a decent man, Sarah said sternly. You don't take advantage of your position. What do you mean? Archie didn't understand. Well, you know, the rector's wife shrugged. There is a case when a student needs to pass something, but doesn't have the brains, nor the conscience. What nonsense, said Archie, whose mind was occupied with some brigands. I apologize, Sarah, but please don't say such things to anyone else, will you? I don't like gossip. This is a temple of science, after all. Well, the guardian of the rector's marital honor tightened her lips. Good, if that's the case. You know, there's no smoke without fire. And then it happened. Jasmine was a freshman with burning, sapphire blue eyes. She was immediately and unanimously voted queen of the course, the daughter of a very powerful man in town. She dressed expensively and knew that all her whims would be fulfilled. She did not hide that she entered the university only because it is decent and right to have a good education. But the future is already predetermined and has nothing to do with the story because her father has already picked up her groom. And then Jasmine fell in love with one of her teachers, that is Archie. He paid no attention at first to her sighs when she lingered at his desk and asked nonsense questions about what they had just gone over. He ignored the lush form she knew how to display. He didn't make her stand out among his other female students, except that he questioned her more strictly than the others because Jasmine was a mediocre student. The indifference of the man did not scare away the beauty. On the contrary, now she doubly wanted to get her way. And one day she just directly asked him on a date. Archie indignantly refused her and said that he was not interested in it at all. He reproached her with the fact that she was only a little older than his own daughter. And then Jasmine decided to take revenge. She arranged that her older brother came to the university to pick her up on the pretext that her own car had broken down. Archie felt like a wimp. He realized that if his father knew about it, he would say that Archie wasn't a man at all, because to let himself be treated like that. But Archie also remembered his grandfather's words that it's better to be a living coward than a dead brave man. That's how it turned out that the brilliant historian became unemployed. True, Archie hoped that will help the cushion of safety that was postponed to live normally for 6 months or 8 months, and sometimes paid for the publication of articles in periodic specialized publications for historians. Plus, theoretically, you could always go write undergraduate theses. Archie knew that some of his colleagues worked part-time in this way, but he himself thought it was completely dishonest. Archie did not reveal all the details of his dismissal to his wife. General phrases outlined that so the circumstances at work. However, Maria in the details and did not intend to delve into the details. Instead, she made a scandal that they will now be homeless. Archie was surprised at this, because there were reserves of money to hold out in general. Then the wife revealed the truth. It turned out that she is mired in credit, and shoes, dresses, and handbags were not taken from girlfriends because they changed their minds to wear and bought. In addition, it turned out that the wife, all that was in the airbag, drained into some financial pyramid scheme. They're promised that the profit is enough for a yacht and an apartment in Monaco, and in the end, of course, nothing was. Archie then for the first time seriously yelled at Maria, said that he really hopes that her genes to daughter at a minimum passed. Aurora, by the way, supported her father. She was shocked that now, thanks to her mother, she has nothing to buy for school clothes and a new laptop. Yes, and about the payment of the equestrian club, dance studio, and cooking classes, master classes could forget. A week later, Maria said she wanted a divorce and added another blow that long ago behind Archie's back she met with another, a real man, not a dusty bookworm. "You're so right. You make me sick," Maria shouted. "You walk around dressed like an old man." "Well, who, answer me, who nowadays wears shirts and knitted vests? You're stinking to death with your dust. You're not a man. You're a predictable bastard. I don't feel like a woman around you anymore." Archie apologized for all the evil words he had said, saying that they shouldn't ruin the family because they've been together so long, they have a daughter. But Maria was adamant. She said she was tired of being the wife of a beggar and left. Moreover, Archie could not understand how it happened, but she managed to eventually turn his daughter against him. Aurora said that she wanted to live with her mom because at least there she would be provided with a future. And that's how Archie lost his family. Ever since then, seeing his daughter had been hell for him. No, he was immensely happy every time to see his little girl Aurora, he still perceived as a baby, needing care and constant attention. He held on and never reproached his daughter for coldness. Maria insisted that meetings with Aurora would be held in the girl's new home. Archie tried to save more money to give her something special on her visits. He often showed his daughter a photo of their dog and said that the dog missed her, his little faithful mistress. Sometimes Aurora agreed to go with her father to the movies, to the park for a walk, but communication was becoming more and more strained by the minute. After such meetings, Archie felt like a nightmare, as if his life force had been sucked out of him by a huge pump. And lately, he began to succumb more and more to gloomy thoughts that it was his own fault, buried in his dusty books, a worm of science. His wife said right. He must have been a bad father. Not enough time for his daughter, and his wife too. Perhaps he should have given her more flowers and compliments. So he had alienated himself from his family, and now he was getting what he deserved. Archie finished eating his sandwiches. Then his thoughts returned to the strange beads from the berry box. Again he twirled them in his fingers, and then, changing his habit of washing up immediately after a meal, he grabbed his notebook. There was one person who could help make sense of this whole story. Stan knew him from his college days sitting together freshman year. But then the guy had dropped out, realizing that the story in dry form, it wasn't his. Instead, Stan had gone to law school and, according to current information, although they didn't see each other that often, was successfully working for a company as a lawyer. However, the red-headed guy had a secret. To be more precise, a shadowy part of his life, to which very few people were privy. It was that Stan was a treasure hunter. On this ground, by the way, they initially became friends. True, the friendship was born out of a severe dispute. Stan shared with Archie the dream that one day he would find some legendary treasure and become a multimillionaire, or better yet, a billionaire. Archie cooled his new acquaintance by saying that treasure hunting, if it was a real case and not the kind of thing you see in Hollywood movies, was a very long and complicated process that involved a large team, had to work with sources, which were old documents, had to take years and, of course, required a large financial investment. In general, Archie was convinced that great treasures were not found by dashing around alone. Stan told him, "We'll wait and see." They didn't talk for a couple of days, and then they got to talking again. And as it happened, they became buddies. Stan lived alone, paid the mortgage, successfully moved away from his parents, but he was in no hurry to commit himself to marriage. He said he wanted to enjoy his freedom and would never put a ring on anyone's finger before the age of 40. And although he, like Archie, was already well over 30, talking about his theoretical future wedding, Stan was sure that the ring he would give to this chosen one was not a simple one, not some trivial thing from a jewelry store, but certainly one that he himself would find as a treasure. "How are you? Alive?" Stan asked me sympathetically as soon as he picked up the phone. "I guess your ex has already drunk your blood, huh?" "Fuck her," Archie answered honestly and from the bottom of his heart, and then summarized the reason why he had decided to call. "Whoa, well, get in here. If it's inconvenient for you tonight." "If it was inconvenient, I'd say so. Come on now. No adventure waiting." Stan sternly hurried his friend and hung up. Leaving Tristan a full bowl of dry food, Archie went to his friend's house. "I've already ordered the pizza and made coffee." Rubbing his hands together, Stan let Archie in. Dressed in knit home pants and a t-shirt with green aliens on it, this man looked nothing like the serious lawyer whose life he existed during the weekdays. But this day was Saturday on the calendar, and accordingly Stan was relaxing as much as he could. Before the delivery guy showed up with 2 large pepperoni and Hawaiian pizzas, Stan had time to listen to his friend's story again and ask all the necessary clarifying questions. Then they got to the pizza and topped some more. Stan didn't push, but Archie needed to talk, and he shared how disgusting the morning meeting had been. He had to pretend that he had learned Zen and was able to have tea with his ex-wife and her current man. He had to pretend that he was not touched by the fact that his daughter, his little Aurora, had once called this bandit her father. Not stepfather, but father. And even though it was said in passing and obviously not to hurt him, the residue, as they called it, remained. "You should have gotten sole custody," Stan said. "I would have helped." "I didn't want to take Aurora away from her mom," Archie said. "I thought we might be able to work something out. And I also thought that maybe, if I made concessions to them, maybe she'd come back at all. I thought time would sort things out." "Time can mold everything," my friend said meaningfully, "but it can't glue together what has already shattered into atoms." "Are you into philosophy again?" "No, just life observations. So give me your find. And of course, tell me what you think about it too." Archie said everything he had time to think. According to his version, the beads belonged to the second half of the 15th century and were of heterogeneous origin, some of them clearly made by local craftsmen, but the other part, that is, 2 more things, looked like elements of jewelry, characteristic of ancient Persia. "Whoa, cool, so there's a treasure somewhere in our woods," Stan exclaimed. "You know," Archie ruffled his hair in his usual nervous way, "this is the first time I've ever agreed with you so much. See, here's the thing, if that's what I'm thinking." "Well," Stan tapped the floor with his slipper foot, tapping impatiently, but waiting for his friend to chew another slice of pizza. Archie went on. "He told me that long ago, back in the 50s, historians, led by his grandfather, had searched the area for a treasure. Legends said that it was collected by a bandit nicknamed Black Sable. He was a nightmare villain, He ruined many souls, and on the day of his execution, he threw into the crowd the words that the gold, all that he had accumulated, he hid safely and let it disappear, but only it will not be found. Never. Naturally, historians treated all this with a fair share of skepticism, but all the same searches were conducted. How big a treasure is it? Depends on how you measure it, Archie sighed. If from the point of view of the cultural value of objects, then it should be a lot of things that belong in a museum. If the price, then it comes out, taking into account what you can get as a reward for finding the treasure, still decent. Friends honestly divided the last slice of pizza equally and at the same time finished the soda. There's a couple million in there somewhere. Wow. Cool, Stan grinned. That's a car you can buy. Dollars. His buddy choked on his food, coughed, and looked up with rounded eyes. Some grandma found this? I don't think so. I just don't get it, Stan said. I've read a lot about treasure, but how could it, so well hidden, end up where my grandmother used to pick berries? It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to me either, Archie said. But maybe if theoretically the chest was hidden in the hollow of a tree, and then it fell, for instance, in a storm, rotted, and all that stuff fell to the ground. Anyway, he grinned unhappily. Maybe I shouldn't have rattled you in the first place. Maybe it's not gold at all, although the pieces themselves seem genuine to me. Whether it's gold or not is easy to check, Stan replied. We'll find out tomorrow. But it's also important whether the alloy is modern or not, isn't it? Right? So I'll contact the man tomorrow. I can trust him. And then, if it's all true, Stan was watching very carefully. What are you gonna do? Archie hesitated. You've already thought about it. I can see it in your face. You want to find the treasure. Well, theoretically, it would be nice, answered the man and rubbed his hair again. There's a forestry nearby, a recreation center, a village. I don't know where exactly Grandma picked strawberries, on whose land. Maybe the search will be pointless if we can't find the old woman. Then we got to find her. Stan clapped his hands together. We got to ask all the locals about her. It's elementary. All right, buddy, I'm in. Let's find the treasure and make our financial situation better. All right? Archie was silent for a few minutes. He looked over at his friend's shoulder at the window. It was dark outside. He imagined how far away, in someone else's house, lived his daughter, who was slowly becoming a stranger to him. He remembered how lost he felt when he was actually thrown out of the university. He thought about the fact that the last years he had lived, really very right, and even boring, except it didn't make him happy for some reason. So maybe this venture was just what he needed. I'm in, Archie said and winked at Stan. The next morning, Archie safely slept through his alarm clock. In principle, after he'd quit his job under Duras, using an alarm clock at all seemed pointless to him, but it gave the illusion of life. Past, normal, right. But this morning, against his custom, he didn't even hear it. But he did hear a persistent knock on the door, twice, a pause, and 3 times. He jumped up and rushed down the hallway, where Tristan was already at the door, dancing in the inimitable style of a bored dog. Archie swung the door open without even asking who was behind it, because only one person could knock like that. Aurora, daughter. He opened his arms to her. The girl jumped over the threshold and dived into her father's arms, hugged him back tightly as, "It's been a long time." What are you doing here?" he asked confusedly. "I came to see you," Aurora answered and sniffled. Archie pulled her gently away from him and looked into her face. No, she wasn't sick. She was crying. And judging by the swollen red nose, she was crying a lot. And it was strange and frightening. Because his Aurora wasn't a crybaby. She hadn't cried since she was about 10 years old. Even if she broke her knee, even if they came to the store and the stuffed lion cub he promised her from his paycheck, the miracle toy that could walk and growl, wasn't there because they'd sold out. Even if she did not win the school crafts contest and her model of an active volcano was called in front of everyone delusional, talking about a tendency to schizophrenia. After this incident, by the way, Archie for the first time in his life fought. That is, literally gave the school principal in the nose. Not in public though, but one-on-one in his office. He was shocked, but then said he deserved it because he couldn't take it out on a student because he just wanted to vent his rage because his wife cheated on him. Aurora wasn't a crybaby, and Archie couldn't even begin to guess what had brought her to this state of mind. He took his daughter into the kitchen, put the tea on. I started to pack the table. As luck would have it, there were only dumplings left in the fridge and a piece of cheese, which had gone stale. Maybe we should go to the store. Dad, no need to go to the store. I'm not hungry, said the girl, and Archie realized that the last one, he himself did not notice how he said out loud. Daddy, we need to talk. She sniffed her nose again. Sure, sweetheart. He sat down next to her and took her hands. Cold fingers. He remembered how, as a child, Aurora had always asked him to warm her fingers with his breath when she came back from a walk in winter, and laughed at it. It wasn't like that now, of course. But Archie still held her hand and slowly warmed her with his own warmth. Tristan laid down at the feet of his little mistress. Mommy wants to, the girl began. Mommy said we're leaving soon. What? She says, it was Austin who decided that. He's having some kind of business trouble. Daddy, I think he's done something bad. Why would you say that? I don't know, Aurora shrugged. He's angry. Someone's always calling him, or he calls. He's fighting with these people. He said we're going to Turkey soon. Turkey? Archie couldn't get his head around it. He didn't understand what was going on. Aurora continued talking. It turned out that Mom didn't like the idea either. But Austin yelled at her and said that he, as a man, decides everything. Aurora's opinion, of course, was never asked. He drank again last night, the girl whispered, dimming her gaze. He laughed yesterday so badly. He said that when I grow up a little, he will marry me there, because he's gonna do business with them now. And some people would like a young Russian wife. Natural blonde, the daughter sobbed again. Daddy, I don't want to go anywhere. You're not going. I'm not letting you go. Archie hugged his child, held her tightly against him, as if right now someone was ready to tear her away, to separate her from him forever. And in those moments, he realized that apparently, he had underestimated Maria's stupidity and the danger of her boyfriend. Looks like he needed to talk to Stan again, not as an adventurer, but as a competent lawyer. Okay, Daddy, Aurora ran her hands over her face, wiping away the tears, and smiled. Everything will be fine. What are you doing here? What else could a scientist be doing? Reading boring, dusty books and looking for treasure. The last one came out accidentally. In fact, Archie had no intention of telling his daughter about this strange story. Wow, Aurora's eyes sparkled. Treasure? Tell me. Archie was sure of something strong about Aurora's ability to keep secrets. That's why he told her in general terms that he and Stan were going to try to find something of great cultural value. Then Aurora said she was hungry after all. Archie decided that cooking was a waste of time, so we decided to order sushi and his daughter's favorite donuts with colorful glaze, and they sat down to watch some stupid movie, a comedy that Mom would never approve of. They don't know you're here, do they? Archie asked. No, Aurora smiled slyly at him. I called Catherine and she said she'd cover for me. Mom thinks I'm having a sleepover, so I'll drive you home in the morning. What kind of a ride, Dad? There was no agreement that I could come and visit you. You just drop me off at the station where the train leaves, and then I'll go on my own. You've gotten so big. He stroked his daughter's head. Adventurer, do you remember when I braided your pigtails? It was the scariest braids in the whole class. Aurora rolled her eyes. That day, we got out of the house to take Tristan for a walk. Then with laughter, soap to the thread, washed his paws from the street mud. Then the daughter went to bed in her old room. And that night, Archie had no nightmares for the first time in a very long time. That's it, Dad. You go, I'll go on my own. His daughter waved her hand when there were 5 minutes left before the arrival and departure of the 9 o'clock train. Are you embarrassed to see me off? Archie frowned. Well, Dad, she stretched out and rolled her eyes again. I'm just not a little girl anymore. Okay, all right, I got it. I'm out of here. He headed away from the platform in the direction of the parking lot. Aurora stared tensely in his wake. And when she realized that her father did not look back, that his back was already lost in the flow of people, the girl sighed and lowered her head. She just really needed to be alone now because she really wanted to cry. It just ran out of strength, and it seemed simply impossible. That's nauseating to return to the house where her mother lives. But the main reason for the tears was that Aurora was ashamed in front of her father for being so corrupt, allowed to entice himself to the other side with gifts, for listening to all the nasty things that his mother said about him, and even agreed with the arguments about why it was necessary to divorce. But now Aurora's eyes were opened. Finally, her electric train pulled up. Now it was clear to Archie Stan hadn't changed a bit. As he was a brute of a head, so he remained, except that he sometimes wore a business suit with a tie. In general, he was a chameleon, but his true native coloring, that is, the essence, was quite different. In just a week, this guy had been very active. He had made inquiries about the soil composition of the upcoming excavation sites, and apparently he had not spent an hour of sleep during the working week. Otherwise, Archie could not explain how Stan had managed to analyze all those ancient maps he had given him, to select the necessary equipment, to plan everything. Look, Archie asked me one day, in terms of legality, is everything okay? We won't get in trouble for being shrews out there. Don't worry, Stan waved and winked. I'll take care of it. All we have to do is find the treasure. Are you talking like a lawyer? Or like a guy who's not afraid to wander Colombia on foot? Archie asked mockingly. Don't start. Stan wagged his finger at him. I'm the brains on this team, and you're the brawn. Muscle, yeah, the blonde sighed, ruffling his hair again. I'm skinny like, okay. We do what we do. But if anything, all the lumps on you. For an extra percentage, Stan squinted. You'll be fine. Archie snorted. Early the next Saturday morning, Archie arrived at Stan's house, and it was decided to drive the lawyer's car because it was an SUV with a roomy trunk. The friends decided that it was necessary to spend a couple of days at the site of the supposed location of the treasure, which meant that it was wise to rent rooms in a vacation home for the weekend. And even such a worrying moment for Archie as Tristan's arrangement for the duration of their little adventure was settled. At first, he thought that the pet would stay in the pet hotel, but it turned out that the holiday home for an additional fee accepts pets, for which there was organized a kind of mini hotel. And of course, the owners could take them whenever they wanted for walks in the picturesque expanses. Just before they were to leave the apartment, Stan received a phone call. He listened and grimaced. Listen, you go alone, huh? What do you mean? Archie was confused. Well, I got to go to the firm. It's kind of a day off, but a VIP client, has some acute problem and I have to drop by there for a short consultation. I'll delegate the business to an intern. I have a smart guy there, so maybe I should wait for you. No, Stan said no. Go. You unpack there normally, and I'll be back by tonight. Well, tomorrow morning at the latest. Tonight or morning? Archie was starting to panic. Tonight, I think. I'll call you in an hour to let you know how it is. I had to agree, of course. With Tristan on a leash, Archie went downstairs. He opened the door, letting the dog into the back seat. He got into the driver's seat and started the car with the key Stan had given him. Carefully, he drove out of the yard and onto the road. Tristan, why are you so mad? I turned to the pet, who was suspiciously spinning in the back of the car, whining mischievously and wagging his tail. Hi, Dad. The fact that his daughter came out of the back of the seats was so unexpected that Archie almost missed the moment when he had to rearrange on the road in the other lane. Almost got into it. Dad, don't be angry. The girl smiled charmingly and flapped her eyelashes, but not now. Aurora had to explain very quickly that she again told her mother that she went to her friend for the weekend, that she grumbled but let go, and she decided that she could not miss such an adventure as a treasure hunt. Excluded, Archie replied with all the strictness he could muster. Why not, said her daughter. Because it could be dangerous. I don't think so. He shook his head. But it's just not the right thing for a child to do. I'm not a child. Yes, you're only 15. You're a historian, and you should know that at my age in the Middle Ages, you could already rule a principality or be a shopkeeper, or even be a member of a merchant's guild. These are exceptional cases, and you know that this happened only because in those families, in specific cases, there were no male heirs. You're a bore, Aurora sighed. She climbed into the seat with her feet up, folded her arms across her chest, and pouted. What am I supposed to do with you? Archie said thoughtfully, watching her in the rearview mirror. Don't send me to my mom and stepdad, okay? Archie cursed silently to himself. The little girl knows how to push. And imagine, Aurora continued in a conspiratorial tone, how my mother would be angry if she knew that you took me on such a case. And Archie liked that argument very much. All right, you're coming with us. He sighed and nodded. Yay. Would Uncle Stan mind? Stan's a little crazy, so you'll get along with him. But on the ride over, Archie tried to tell his daughter that there were some rules she had to follow. For example, he said that while they were walking through the forest, it would be better for her to stay in the room. Aurora willingly, as if very hastily, agreed. Archie said nothing, but he knew from long experience that if his daughter seemed to become obedient, then she intended to behave in the opposite way. Rest home in the Soviet past, and now a sanatorium with a lakai, but adjusting to a peaceful mood named House by the Stream, was located at a sufficient distance from the city to seduce vacationers' ecological purity of the surrounding nature, but close enough that it could be easily and quickly get to it, coming, for example, not for a long time, but for the weekend, and even for a day. The main building, whose architecture was influenced by the Silver Age, was surrounded by a pine forest, some specimens of which could actually boast of being 100 years old. When they arrived at the place, Archie first of all entrusted Tristan to the care of the appropriate staff, and then wanted to have a serious one more talk with his daughter to remind her of their arrangement. You know, Daddy, she said, finally taking her eyes off the brochure about the Creek House, I think you're going to need my help after all. You're a kid. Archie seemed ready to say that forever, but it seemed to him more and more that his daughter was getting angry at this definition of herself. This was a teenage rebellion all over again. Well, we'll see. At least I can walk with you or immediately lock you in the room. What to do with you, sighed the man. Let's go. Hopefully someone who works here will be able to tell us what we need. What's our legend? What? Archie didn't understand. Well, a legend. Aurora explained and looked at him as if he were a fool, but that's how he felt. You can't tell the truth, so you need a cover story, like special agents on a secret mission. What secret agents, Aurora? He shook his head. The usual questions. Why I'm looking for my grandmother is my own business. The first thing Archie tried to do was to talk to the maid who had met him in the corridor, but she said that first of all, she was new, and secondly, she was very busy and didn't have time to talk. She advised to address all questions to the administrator or his deputy. So Archie decided to try his luck with the checkroom attendant. He didn't understand why a closet was needed in a place where everyone lived by number, but there was one for some reason. The cloakroom attendant, judging by the name on her badge, was Selena, and she was well into her 50s. She frowned when Archie started to ask, "What's your business with her?" "It's my own business," he replied, embarrassed at the confusion. Selena, apparently not satisfied with that answer, pressed her lips together and mumbled that she didn't know anything. "I told you, Dad," Aurora said snidely. "There's a man walking around, asking questions. Well, who's going to answer you?" "What do you think I should have done, Miss Know-It-All? You think you can do better?" "Easy." Aurora shook her hair and headed for the checkroom attendant. "Good afternoon. Please forgive me for bothering you, but we don't know who to turn to. Nobody knows anything. Maybe you can help us?" She waved her hands helplessly and smiled charmingly, and then continued talking. Archie listened and could not believe what a skillful liar his daughter was. Aurora's legend was based on the fact that one day she and her father were driving along the road on a rainy evening and saw an old woman on the side of the road who was voting. They decided to give her a ride, but she soon asked to be dropped off and walked off across a clear field to somewhere. And now she, Aurora, and Daddy, of course, are very worried about Grandma. How did she get there? Did she catch a cold? She must have been afraid of Papa, Aurora added. He's a good man. He's very good. You know, his grandfather was a professor and he's a historian himself. He teaches at the Institute. Yes, stretched the checkroom attendant and corrected her glasses and looked at Aurora more respectfully. You know, Aurora lowered her voice and seasoned it with an intonation that is usually used to tell big and terrible secrets. Papa must have frightened her. You see, he was preparing for a lecture just now, and the subject was the Spanish Inquisition. He could only think about the Inquisition, so he started talking about it with his traveling companion. She probably thought my dad was some kind of psycho, maybe even a maniac. Aurora rolled her eyes habitually and blew her bangs off her forehead. But he's just a historian, really. My dad is a very good man. He even volunteers sometimes, cleaning up parks when they need it or giving gifts to nursing homes. Anyway, we'd really like to find Grandma. Maybe you could help us?" The checkroom attendant was very impressed by all the information that had been dropped on her. "All right, don't worry. Oh, what a kind girl you are. I won't tell you about the grandmother, but you can talk to our deputy administrator. Her name is Ariana." Then Selena added where Ariana could be found, and with everything triumphant, Aurora went back to her father. "Now, sunshine, let's think about the fact that your lies are no good for this very Ariana," Archie said as he and his daughter walked to the deputy administrator's office. "It's better to tell the truth here. I'm just worried about Grandma and anyway, we've decided that she didn't sell berries for a good living." Archie summarized the story. "What's next, Dad?" "Suppose we found her," Aurora said thoughtfully. "You wouldn't talk to her directly about the gold, would you? You don't have a plan for this part of our adventure, do you?" "Yes," Archie sighed. "I guess we'll take it as it comes. There's plenty of time." Finally, they went up to that floor and got to the part of the building where the administration, the people who ran the vacation home, were located. The man and the teenage girl passed the secretary's post, and luckily, it turned out that it was quite possible to stop by Ariana for an important matter that only she could solve. But additionally, Archie assured the receptionist that he and his daughter liked everything at the Creek House because the young girl was very excited about the position. Archie had expected Ariana to be a solid lady of years, a person, as they call it, old school. He didn't expect to find a woman of about 25, a brunette with a bob haircut and big, deer-like eyes, dressed in a strict yet elegant business suit with a pencil skirt. Apparently, he stared excessively because Aurora elbowed him in the side. Ariana listened to the story presented to her attentively. She frowned or pressed her lips together or sighed heavily. "You don't have to worry," she said. "You see, it was my great-grandmother, Juliet. You sit down." She pointed to the armchairs, embarrassed that she had not offered to make her unexpected visitors comfortable before. Archie and Aurora sat down. Ariana offered them tea, coffee. Archie declined, but Aurora didn't, and at the same time, she asked incredulously for cookies or candy, and then her father had to shove her lightly in the side, but she only rounded her eyes innocently. From Ariana's story, a lot of things came to light. It turned out that some of the staff, if it was convenient for them, could live right in the recreation center. One of the buildings, a small one, was set aside for miniature service apartments. Ariana didn't talk much about herself, wasn't very frank, but Archie and Aurora realized that it was more convenient for her to live right here, and she'd made that choice in favor of her great-grandmother because the doctors insisted that non-city fresh air was very important to the old lady. "You see, she's smart. Worked all her life as a teacher," Ariana smiled. "But the age, the doctors say it's because of it, and maybe a little, no, she's not crazy. It's just that she likes to go out a lot and doing things she used to do when she was younger. And back then she used to love picking berries. She always picked more than her family needed. She gave them to friends, neighbors. Now she stands by the highway, giving berries away, but she doesn't take the money, as if she takes it and throws it away. Juliet is very nice. It's just, I guess it happens in old age, that there are strange behaviors. For example, she won't wear the new clothes I buy her. She wears old ones." "How is she now?" Aurora asked. "It was such weather then. Grandma didn't catch a cold?" "Of course she has a cold." Ariana sighed again and covered her eyes and rubbed the bridge of her nose. "I didn't look after her. She went into the woods, to her glades. So there are strawberries growing nearby." Aurora asked with genuine delight but hidden interest, "And vacationers from here can go for it?" "Well, at the beginning of the season they usually pick them," smiled Ariana. "But if you go farther into the forest, yes, there will be berries. If you look hard enough." Juliet, I'm afraid, went right into the swamps. They border the reserve, by the way. I don't advise you to go there, and if it were up to me, I would forbid anyone to go there at all. "Why?" Aurora asked. "You can easily get lost. And besides, what if wild beasts come out? Not that there's anything to fear from predators, more like moose. But still." "Thank you," Archie said. "Thank you for your time. I feel a bit calmer now." "Thank you." Ariana laughed, and he noticed that she had dimples on her cheeks. Few people these days are so genuinely concerned about other people's old people. Leaving the office a few minutes later, Archie was ready to go under because his interest was not disinterested. No, he theoretically cared about the old woman who had run off through the bushes. But if it hadn't been for the whole treasure story, then Archie admitted to himself he wouldn't have gone looking for her, which meant he had to admit that there was a dark side to him, and he didn't want to think about how it might manifest itself. Finally, father and daughter reached the family room, one room for the adults and another smaller one for the child. After discussing everything in Ariana's office, they agreed that there was no way they could talk to grandmother yet. They would have to think of an excuse, or try to find a reason to talk to Juliet when she went out for a walk. But that, with the old lady's cold, would now take an unknown amount of time. "We may have reached an impasse," said Archie. "We're not giving up," snorted Aurora and slumped onto the bed in her sneakers. At another time, Archie would have reprimanded his daughter for this, but now he didn't have time for that, especially since the phone rang. It was his ex-wife. Archie tried to smile somewhere. In some popular psychology book, it was said that if you smile, your mood will reflexively become better. But in this case, it didn't help. It only made my jaws clenched even tighter. The wife didn't speak. She just screamed that her daughter was missing. "Aurora isn't missing. She's with me," Archie replied with vengeful calm. "No, I'm not taking her back." "No, you're not taking her back." "What? Austin's gonna come and get her?" With a familiar gesture of fluffing his hair, Archie smirked. "He's the one who's going to be taken to the trauma center." Aurora sat up on the bed and stared at her father with rounded eyes. "How dare I talk to you like that? You should be thanking me for letting you get this far in the first place." "Shut your mouth. I won't say it again." "Shut your mouth. Aurora will be with me for a couple more days. She'll come back when she wants to. When I let her." He ended the call. He took a deep breath that made his chest ache and exhaled slowly. A calmness came over him, a calmness that had never been experienced before. "Daddy," Aurora whispered. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have spoken to your mom like that." "Daddy," the girl squealed happily and threw herself on his neck. "You're wonderful." "Daddy, I should have apologized yesterday for being such a fool. Letting myself be bought with gifts. Letting her." Aurora looked into his eyes very seriously. It seemed that her pupils reflected that she was growing up. "You're a wonderful person, Aurora," he replied, "but in some ways you are still a child. It's all right." It was a delightful, unique moment of father-daughter intimacy. And at that moment, there was a knock at the door. Phew, I barely made it out. Stan showed up on the doorstep. He looked interesting. Camouflage-colored pants, boots, a turtleneck with a wolf face, a bandana with a pirate symbol, and a black leather jacket. In short, the friend dressed as his heart commanded and circumstances allowed. "Hello, little one." He waved his hand to Aurora. "So, how are you doing? Did you find out anything?" "Why don't we talk over lunch?" Aurora said. "I'm hungry. I don't count the candy bars from Dad's glove compartment in the car. Is there a restaurant here?" "There's everything, milady," Archie grinned. "Come along." Over a hearty lunch, which turned out to be surprisingly tasty and appetizing in its variety of dishes, it really was easy and comfortable to talk about everything. But of course, they kept their voices down and words like treasure and gold were avoided. "Theoretically," Stan said, and reached for the leftover chicken schnitzel on his plate with his fork. "We could, armed with maps, scour all the likely locations of the treasure. But it would take time. It wouldn't take a weekend." "What about randomly?" Aurora asked. "There have been treasures found literally by accident," Stan thought. "But I'm afraid we're not that lucky. Although, I think we should go to the forest anyway. Tonight before sundown." "Don't even think about it," sent a warning look to Archie's daughter. "You'll be a good girl and stay in your room, understand?" "Yes, Mr. Dictator," she replied, making the most disgruntled face. "By the way," Stan said, "there are maps of the area in the lobby. There's all kinds of hiking trails. You should take one, huh?" "I don't want to rely on my smartphone in the woods. Can you do it?" "We'll pick out dessert, won't we, little one?" He winked at Aurora. "Okay," Archie replied, rising from the table. "Just order me a coffee. I don't like sweets, unlike you honey eaters." In the lobby maps, as well as brochures and guidebooks useful to guests, were on a large rotating rack. Archie dug into them, looking for what he needed, and when he found what he was looking for and was about to return to the restaurant, he bumped his nose into a man's shoulder. "My apologies," he muttered intelligently, looked up, and froze on the spot, because it was an old acquaintance, with whom some very bad memories were associated, Richard Stone. "Good afternoon," he replied and smiled. Archie thought that it might be a good day for Richard, for he was sure to break something for him now that he had the chance. "We need to talk," Richard said sharply. Archie swallowed. He's not a coward, but when such a grisly-sized mass of humanity looms over you. "About what?" he asked, almost shocked that his own voice didn't waver. "About what was?" Richard answered, and Archie was still in shock, but realized that there were some guilty notes in the man's voice. It couldn't be, but it turned out it could. Richard invited him to sit on the sofa in the lobby. There was no refusal. He offered to help himself to a cup of coffee from the bar. Archie decided against it, and then Richard simply spoke. Briefly, but clearly, emotionally, within the bounds of propriety, he told him that they had married Jasmine, and she soon left her husband in disgrace because she cheated on him. And then the nightmarish truth was revealed that Jasmine was basically a girl of very uncomplicated behavior, that she also secretly from the family had bad habits, played gambling cards. All ended with the fact that Jasmine stole from his father's safe money and flew somewhere abroad, supposedly Nicaragua. Anyway, she turned out to be a real piece of work. And now Richard wanted to apologize for what he'd done. He said he'd been an idiot to let his sister manipulate him so cleverly. And as the older brother, he should have known better. "So now I can go back to teaching." Archie grinned bitterly. "You could have," Richard muttered, averting his eyes. "I didn't tell anyone, anywhere, anything. I was just trying to scare you. I apologize. On behalf of the Stoney clan, I apologize." "Okay, it's okay." Archie gently reached out and patted the man on the shoulder. "Maybe it's only because I lost my job." Archie went back to the restaurant. Afterwards, everyone went to their rooms. Archie said that it would be best to leave at 5 o'clock in the evening when it would be light and they would have time to walk along the edge of the forest. "Wait for me." The fact that the daughter appeared from behind when he and his friend were about to leave the vacation home, loaded with solid backpacks, Archie was not surprised. He just rolled his eyes. And he tried to put as much convincing as he could into this tone to his daughter. Archie mentally cursed. How could it be? He was able to manage a whole audience of students. His subject was as quiet as mice. And his own daughter, what was wrong with her? But on the other hand, it was worth recognizing that Aurora's willfulness was in harmony with her inherent prudence in general. And of course, Archie just didn't know how to be really angry with his daughter. "Darling, I thought we had a deal. The agreement is canceled." The girl raised her chin, stubbornly flashed her eyes. "Not without me." "How about tomorrow?" Stan said. "Today." The teenager frowned. "Did you drop this?" Suddenly, Richard appeared near the company, holding one of the maps on which Stan had recently marked the most likely places to look. "Richard," exclaimed Stan. "Leshy," replied the Stoney clan representative, equally astonished. "You two know each other?" Archie was surprised. "Dad, who's Richard?" Aurora was worried. "That bastard who made you lose your job. I told him." "Daughter, stop." He barely managed to intercept this ball of righteous rage, the ardor of which would be envied by a Bengal tiger. "It's okay. We've already talked and resolved the misunderstanding." Aurora stopped floundering in her father's arms, blew her bangs off her forehead, and glared at Richard. "Interesting evening," Stan grinned, and then explained what had happened. It turned out that he and Richard had known each other for a long time and linked their participation in the club Treasure Hunters. There, by the way, Stan and acquired the nickname Leshy. But a few years ago, Richard left the ranks of the thirsty adventurers, as if such a boyish interest was not respectable. "Still doing the same thing?" Richard turned to Stan. "Aha," he replied, picking up and smoothing the crumpled map. "Why didn't you tell me you knew each other?" Archie turned to his friend with a reasonable question. "We hadn't talked for a long time when your story happened," he shrugged. "I didn't see the point. It wouldn't have made any difference, would it?" "I agree." Archie sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "Wait a minute." Richard said and squinted. Map, backpacks. You didn't come here for a vacation, did you? The small company looked at each other. What can you offer? Stan was the first to speak up and explain to the dazed Archie that, theoretically, Richard Stone could be very useful in the search for the treasure. He could, theoretically, help with the complicated equipment, and could, in theory, help with the legalities of the whole thing if the treasure was ever found. So I think we should tell him everything, Stan summarized. And he's, as we've already found out, a normal guy. Only if he doesn't make any more hasty decisions, like he did with Daddy, Aurora said cheekily. But Richard was not offended by this remark, and he bowed to her in a graceful, easy manner. Wise words from a young girl go to the very heart. Aurora snorted and turned away, but it seemed she was ready to accept the addition to their little society of treasure hunters. So we'll divide it into fours, Stan summarized the changes in a practical way. And I don't think there's any point in going out tonight. It's getting late. How about tomorrow? Practically first thing in the morning. And Tristan? Aurora asked. Who's Tristan? Richard asked. My dog, Archie explained. He's not gold trained, but I don't think it would do him any harm to go for a walk. Finally, everyone went to their rooms, and the next morning, as they had planned, they began to pack. But they got caught up in little things, argued about the route, then went for a coffee on the road, and went out in the late afternoon. Archie hadn't thought before about how wild the forest could be, which was not so far from a modern city. And barely stepping on the shady, fresh green canopy, he regretted that in the past years so little time spent in nature. All the members of the treasure hunter expedition carried bulky backpacks, all except Aurora and Tristan. Changing clothes, food and water, as well as some equipment, Archie thought sadly that sciatica apparently will come before retirement age. But then somehow he was distracted by the surrounding forest beauties, by the sounds of birds singing, and the burden did not seem heavy anymore. Finally, we reached one of the areas marked on the map. Stan was obviously proud of the fact that he was the most knowledgeable in the art of treasure hunting. He spent almost 2 hours lecturing about how to do everything correctly, how to use a metal detector. He also insisted that everyone repeat aloud the rules of safe behavior in the forest, not to move far away from each other, not to take berries in their mouths. Then they started searching. I found it. Suddenly, Aurora shouted and everyone rushed to her. It's a carnation, said Archie and was about to throw it away, but Stan took it away. Maybe it's ancient, he said. Do you pick up everything? Richard arched an eyebrow questioningly. No, with the first thing, it's good luck. I'll clean it and give it to you later, he winked at Aurora. You can wear it as an amulet. It's better than diamonds. When you choose a husband-daughter, Archie said, make sure he doesn't look like his ex. Then they had a lunch break. Tristan was happier, it seemed, than anyone else. The only thing that upset the dog was the leash, but Archie decided that it was safest for him, that he wouldn't get lost. Then we moved on, and as the time flew by, the sun began to set. Stan said that we could, of course, go back to the rest house, or we could have a sleepover in the woods. It turned out that he had a tent with him. Archie didn't like the idea very much at first, but then he agreed, largely because of how excited Aurora was about it. They made a fire and roasted bread, sausages, baked potatoes in the ashes. Stan turned out to be a handy man in the mini thermo container he had brought with him. He also had fried chicken and plum cake he had bought at the restaurant. All right, Richard said. Everyone settled around the fire, watching the flames play, dancing, dispersing the darkness. If the river were nearer, we could catch fish in the morning for a soup, Stan added his opinion. Even if there is no treasure, I think it will be a most memorable weekend, Archie said, scratching the dog at his feet behind his ear. Aurora had already dozed off, leaning against her father's shoulder. Suddenly, the silence of the night was broken by the sound of a gunshot. The men jumped, and the girl fell to the ground on all fours in surprise. And Tristan? He was dozing, fed up and tired from the impressions of the long day. The end of the leash was wrapped around his master's arm, but now the dog's head was up, his ears perked, and then he darted away. Archie jerked, the leash tightened behind him, and he let him go. Tristan, he shouted, come back. Boy, get back, to his leg, but only the bushes rustled. Who fired? Aurora asked dazedly, rising from the ground. "I don't know," Richard said. "This isn't supposed to be a hunting area. It's a nature reserve a kilometer away." "Hey, where are you going?" he shouted to Archie. "That's my dog. I'm going after him," shouted the man, shining his flashlight into the trees. "Idiot. Stan cursed. I'm going after him. I'm coming with you." Aurora squeaked, startled by what was happening. "Stay with her," Stan asked Richard, and a moment later he disappeared into the woods. "Daddy," the girl sobbed. Richard looked at her carefully. Then he reached into his backpack and handed her a flashlight and a small object. "Here, a flashlight, that's one, and this is bear spray. I don't know what it is, but it might come in handy. Come on." "But shouldn't we? The comms are down. We can't call for help. We can't leave them behind either. And you can't be alone in the clearing by the fire. But you stay behind me, 5 paces behind me, and if I tell you, you duck and hide. Understand?" The girl nodded, hastily wiped her face with her palms, and in a moment, following Richard, disappeared into the darkness of the forest. It was the night of the full moon. The night light was gliding across the sky, not covered by clouds, and so in some parts of the forest, namely in the clearings and glades, it gave a little more than enough light not to break anything moving through it. Archie ran, panting. He saw a flicker of light ahead and hoped that it was not a trick of the eye, but Tristan's fur, and he was not mistaken. But in a moment a branch fell awkwardly under his feet. It was as if it had thrown itself, as if on purpose, and the man rolled down a small hill. The first impressions were as if he had been mentally trampled by a rhinoceros. But rather quickly, though not without a groan of pain, Archie was able to assume an unstable upright position. His ears stopped buzzing. Now he could hear the thick, angry growl of his dog. Tristan. The retriever froze 10 paces from his master. And they were not alone in the clearing. There were 2 other men here, strangers in black, and even though it was night, but Archie realized they were armed. The words stuck in his throat. He didn't understand what was going on, but he realized that no one good with a gun could meet in the forest at night. "You?" exclaimed one of the strangers. Archie squinted his eyes and realized in horror who was Austin, his ex-wife's new man. "What the other man swore. "You said there were no huntsmen here." "It's not a gamekeeper," Austin grinned wickedly. "Just some asshole I know." "Hey you, what are you doing here? Were you following me?" Archie didn't say anything. He practically growled and pointed with the butt of his gun to where he needed to get closer. "You know," he turned to his companion, "it's a lucky thing. The swamps aren't far away. I'm sick of this guy." "Daddy." Aurora flew into the clearing from the opposite side. The girl honestly ran as fast as she could after Richard, but then they accidentally separated, and then she thought she heard a dog barking and she turned in that direction. What the hell is going on? Austin's companion appeared to be freaking out. "You set me up." "It was a coincidence," he replied. "I don't know how those 2 ended up here, but it's a coincidence. Come on, girl, come to daddy." Aurora was terrified and backed away. "No, you're not my father. I'll teach you to obey." Austin grinned wickedly. "I'll make you silky smooth. And you," he waved the butt of his gun at Archie, "stay where you are." But before he could move, Tristan rushed forward. The golden-haired figure soared through the air and came straight at Austin, jaws locked on his arm. The man screamed. "Daddy?" Aurora rushed to her father. "Run." He grabbed her arm and dragged her behind him. "But Tristan," the girl looked back at the dog. "He's clever," Archie breathed out, "and he was right to make a sudden attack." The dog easily evaded the blow that Austin's accomplice in some dark case had tried to throw at him and followed his masters into the woods. In parallel with the frantic running, Archie had time to think that they might stumble at any moment but it did not happen. But suddenly there was a new obstacle, thick thorny bushes. They rose higher than a man's height and seemed to stretch endlessly in one direction. And on the other side there was a rock. Archie listened. Behind them, it seemed from where they had fled, they heard some unnatural sounds for the forest. In the moonlight there was something dark in the rock. He guessed it was a crevice large enough for 2 people on all 4s to squeeze through. Archie pulled his daughter behind him and the 2 of them climbed into the natural hiding place. The faithful dog dived in after them, crouching at their feet. Archie thought his breathing was too loud it was bound to give them away. "Don't bother," he said to his daughter. "I've got a buck up my scruff." Aurora complained and yelped because her elbow had hit a rock. "I've broken something here." "It's a rock. You can't break anything." "But what fell out?" "It hit my leg." Before Archie could answer, there were footsteps in the clearing. "Archie," a familiar voice called out. It was Stan. "Hey dog, Tristan." Stan tried to whistle to lure the dog, but he couldn't whistle at all. "Stan? You?" Archie asked the obvious question, climbing out of his hiding place to help his daughter out. Tristan, on the other hand, did the job himself. Before he was bombarded with anxious questions, Stan hurried to explain. As it happened, by chance, he and Richard had come to the clearing, which had been aided by the noise of a dog in the forest at night. And in the clearing they found those two people. Stan and Richard managed to cope with those opponents, which in principle turned out to be even easy, because one of them had received many marks of the dog's teeth. But almost the main news after the news that there was nothing more to fear was that Austin and the second type were in the woods with a very cruel and heartless purpose. They, judging from everything that was found among them, were poachers and hoped to get an elk. "You can't rely on modern technology." Stan waved his hands. "It works and then it doesn't. In general, the connection appeared at the phones. Those guys are lying there. We tied them up. I left Richard on guard just in case, and I decided to look for you. Anyway, I called for help. There's really a nature reserve nearby. These bastards must have gone that way." "Dad," quietly called Aurora. "Dad." The girl raised her voice and even pulled her parents' hand. "Look what's there." That very crack in the rock, judging by the lichens and rounded edges of the rock, was formed a long time ago, and its surface from the inside was covered with much smaller cracks and potholes. One of these natural hollows had once been covered by another smaller stone, and then when people had gotten into the rock, Aurora had clutched it with her foot, almost tripping and twisting her limb, and the stone had fallen out. And now in the moonlight, there was something glistening in that spot. Am I crazy for that night in the woods, or is it gold? Are there more gemstones nearby? Stan muttered, leaning over and shining his flashlight on the find. "But where from?" said Archie confusedly. Wait, is this a treasure trove? Well, it doesn't look like much, but what else could it be? After a while, had to return to the clearing arrived help, and naturally, very much needed the presence of all participants in the night's tense events. The whole company realized that there were still a lot of formalities to be settled, but still each person of the four was overflowing with the heather honey-like joy that they had found what they wanted to find, literally discovered under their feet. It was an incredible coincidence, and everything had ended in their favor. Naturally, such an event as the discovery of the treasure could not be kept a secret, although Stan and Richard did their best to keep it a secret. This event, unheard of, stirred up all the residents of the vacation home, but just as quickly the information spread that the treasure had indeed been found, it was contained in a small wooden chest that had crumbled into dust over the centuries, except that it existed in a single copy. After this discovery, a clear theory formed in his mind about the beads found at the bottom of the buried chest. He assumed that probably these small particles of gold fell through the cracks between the stones and they were washed away by rain streams, carried to the glade where grandmother was picking strawberries. The glade, by the way, was scrutinized with metal detectors, and the theory was confirmed. There really found 2 more beads. The value of the treasure turned out to be somewhat less than Archie had assumed, but it was still fantastic. And now, for some reason, now that it was all over, he was confused. Stan connected all his connections, the best lawyers he knew, and made Aurora happy that her mother wouldn't get to her share, so it could be arranged that the sum would just end up in the girl's account. And then Stan announced that he was quitting his job because it was time to realize his dream of going to the Caribbean islands to look for pirates' treasures. Archie knew that his ex-wife wouldn't stay away after such news, and it turned out to be true. She called. She tried to meet in person. "Hello, my love," she said, and tried to smile in an ingratiating way. "Archie, darling, I'm sorry. I was wrong." He looked at her. She drove up to the university, knew he was back at work, and timed it. He didn't answer. "You changed." He knew that. "Yeah, a bit of a style change. Got a haircut. Changed from plaid shirts and jeans to suits." I also bought a car, sporty style, and a bold red color. Archie, don't be silent. Maria clasped her hands and cried, not embarrassed. On the contrary, she wanted everyone to see, so that he would be ashamed to treat her like that. Only Archie was completely indifferent to all this. I'll get sole custody of my daughter. It's already decided. You picked Austin well, it shows what kind of mother you are, he told her, and then he just got in his car and drove away. Because he still had his own things to do. They were going to a restaurant with Aurora, Stan, and Robert to celebrate a friend's departure to the Caribbean. Also, Archie was going to stop by Ariana's house. He decided that Grandma Juliet deserved to get her share of the treasure too. Because if it hadn't been for her berry picker, it wouldn't have been found, and maybe it would have stayed in the rock for years to come. Ariana was shocked at what Archie had decided to do, and so far had been reluctant, but he decided that he would convince her to accept this fair reward, and then probably gently ask her out on a date. And Aurora, by the way, had already approved of the idea. His daughter, of course, was now living with him. Archie was starting a new page in his life, a whole lot of new pages, and he knew for sure that none of them would ever have room for his ex-wife. He was out of love with her, and the memories didn't even hurt anymore. Archie just felt free and happy.